Black actors in Hollywood. So segregation in Hollywood, the silent film era. So during the Jim Crow era, Black actors and directors were only allowed to be part of race films. These films were made by Black directors and actors and were made for Black audiences. These race films rarely made it into the mainstream media and were largely forgotten. Only 20% of Black silent films remain today. And this is a poster for a race film during the silent film era. Next slide, Josh. Okay, so Frederica Freddie Washington. So she was of mixed European and African descent, and while she passed as white to use segregated restrooms and eat at restaurants, she was proud of her heritage and refused to pass as white when it came to acting in movies. Her most famous film was known as The Imitation of Life. It portrayed the struggles of being both Black and white and being able to, quote, pass as white. After her role in The Imitation of Life, she was unable to be casted in any race films, as many people identified her as white. She could not land any stereotypical or racial roles as a maid, as her skin was also too light, which was the only role African Americans could play during this time. However, her journey was not over, as she helped found the Negro Actors Guild of America. Now, a famous quote by her was, "Early in my career, it was suggested that I might get further by passing as French or something exotic, but to pass for economic or other advantages would have meant that I swallowed whole hog the idea of Black inferiority." Next slide, Josh.
The first Black Oscar winner. In the 1940s Oscars ceremony, Hattie McDaniel was the first African American to win an Oscar for Best Supporting Actress for her role as Mammy in the Civil War film told from the Confederate South's point of view, Gone with the Wind. During this heavily segregated time, Hattie McDaniel was forced to sit apart from her Gone with the Wind co-stars alone in the back of the room. Although this was a huge step forward for African Americans in film, Hattie McDaniel's role as Mammy was incredibly controversial. Since the 1940s, only 14 Black actors have won an Oscar, with the latest being Lupita Nyong'o in 2014. Next slide. Mammy and Gone with the Wind. Gone with the Wind, circa 1939, is a controversial film about the Civil War, told from the point of view of a Southern woman who struggled to survive during and post-war. The film and book can be praised as a groundbreaking for having a strong female lead and for being the highest grossing film of all time when adjusted for inflation, around 3.7 billion USD. However, it is incredibly racist in its portrayal of slavery and its askew, rose-colored view of the South. Slaves are portrayed as stupid, hopeless, and dependent on their white owners. It puts slavery in a positive light because it seems like the owners are helping Black people by keeping them as slaves. The role of Mammy in this film is as the head slave, an intimate part of the family and maternal figure to her white owner's daughter, Scarlett O'Hara. When faced with backlash on portraying a racist stereotype, Hattie McDaniel replied, "I'd rather play a maid than be a maid." McDaniel was typecasted. 74 out of 94 of her roles were as maids. Next slide. Josh. Okay. The problem with Mammy. A mammy is a racial caricature of African American women used from the era of slavery to Jim Crow that perpetuates the idea that Black people not only enjoyed slavery, but they were completely devoted to serving their white masters. This idea of a mammy was used to uphold the narrative that slavery was a benevolent institution. The stereotype is that the mammy loved her white family like her whole world while disregarding her own Black family, and was desexualized and deliberately constructed to be ugly, made to look overweight, middle-aged, and dark-skinned, and this time it was dark complexion was considered ugly. All this was done to create the assumption that no reasonable white man would choose a Black woman over their ideal white woman, when in reality, Black women were often the subject of sexual abuse by their white owners. Josh. Okay. Do you think Hattie McDaniel was right to take the role of Mammy? Did her achievements as an African American outweigh the stereotypical implications of her role? What do you think?
Well, some people are typing in the chat. I think that she might have been right during her time because this was like the very limited amount of roles that she could take. But looking back, the role that pretty much embraced the stereotype. And although it helped to like desegregate movies, it really doesn't like outweigh the stereotypical implications of her role.
Nora Lee says, I feel that it was her only option for any type of access to some of the opportunities whites had, but it wasn't great as a representation of Black people. It was harmful. Completely agree. Landon says, I think her choice to play the role of a subservient maid indirectly represented at African American women at the time. She was truly a representative of Black Americans in the 1940s, and I think the choice to take a subservient role makes African Americans look subservient much more than it highlighted the achievement of the first African American to win an Oscar. Yeah, and Mr. Rowe is right that the question of right or wrong is not something that non-people of color can probably fairly comment on with the right point of view, and you can't assume to know the pressure that our racist structures placed on her. We'll be moving on. The white savior complex. What is a white savior complex? So a white savior movie is when a white person is the main character in a story about racial struggles. So the history is that it was popularized because of the 1960s civil rights movement. The intention is to open the discussion of racism and deepen the understanding of audiences of people of color's experiences. What it does wrong. White people leading people of color against white antagonists insinuates that people of color couldn't achieve their goals without a person's help. The savior is usually a mentor who morally redeems the person or community of people of color by the film's end, making it seem like racism was solved by the end of the movie. White characters dominate discussions where people of color should lead, and it makes it seem like people of color were passive in their own history. So of course we want to include more, as some people might not be Black or Native American, as the white savior complex applies to other racial predicaments as well, like Middle Eastern problems and Asian problems, like racism in that area. Obviously, we want to include more people of different backgrounds, but you shouldn't use a non-person of color to talk about struggles faced by people of color. So movies that embody the white savior complex. It's about racial tensions between Black domestic workers and white employers during the 1960s civil rights movement. The protagonist is a young white woman who wants to write about the experiences of the maids, not the actual Black maids themselves. Hidden Figures is about, well, I haven't actually watched the movie, but my colleagues have, and as well a couple articles that I looked through. And basically, the NASA employee, Katherine Johnson, is helped by her boss, Al Harrison, who actually isn't a real person. He's used as the white savior plot device and was added to connect with white audiences because studios didn't think white people at the time of the 1960s civil rights movement could really connect with Black stories. And so this trope continued on to modern day Hollywood. Johnson actually had to watch the launch from her desk, and she used the white restroom because she stood up for herself, not because her boss broke a colored sign. The Blind Side. It's loosely based on a true story, but Hollywood changed it many times. many things about it, such as making Michael O'Hare seem more stupid and helpless to make the white woman, Leanne Tui, more like a hero. And it doesn't assert Michael O'Hare as in charge of his life, making it seem like Tui fixed him. Did you know about or understand the white savior complex before? What are some other movies that use this trope?
Something I wanted to add, just while you guys are typing, was that Viola Davis, who played one of the maids in The Help, actually talked about on a later interview that she felt like she portrayed her race by playing that role because she felt that the story focused on the white reporter rather than where it should have been, which was the perspective of the maids who were serving the racist families.
Yeah, that's a great point. I wonder what these actors and actresses thought about when they reflected on these movies after. Was this something that they were aware of? Like, for example, Sandra Bullock, was this ever brought to her attention? What did she say? I'd be interested in kind of doing some more research online to look more into this here.
That's a good point. And I actually had no idea about the white savior complex either until we started working on this project. And now that think about it, it's actually amazing to me how Hollywood still continues this trope into modern day. You know, it's remarkable.
Landon says, I didn't know about this before. I can think of shows and movies where people of color are casted as supporting roles of white actors. These characters usually aren't given a complex character arc and aren't written to relate with the audience like the main character is. Yeah, absolutely. I can see that. Nora Lee says, sadly, it happens in real life too. Education, medicine, nonprofit organizations, and e-politics. Agree. I thought this was a really good topic to learn about as a person of color myself. I didn't really understand it. And now that I've watched a couple of those movies like The Blind Side and The Help, and now I see that, and I think it'll give me more to ponder about and kind of learn from as I continue to watch more movies like this. Next slide.
So let's now talk about Black musicians in the music industry. So there was heavy segregation in the music industry, like other times of society, and specifically in race records. Now, this was music made for and by Black audiences. Now, this was formed because of the segregation within society, and Black artists sang in all types of music, but they were rarely recorded. Oftentimes, Black artists made a huge impact on the blues, jazz, and gospel music genres, but they received little of the recognition. And these Black artists were often found behind the scenes, writing hit songs, but receiving little of the credit. Now, as you guys can see, this is a store in Ohio which specialized in selling race records. So let's dive a little bit more into the genres of music. So first up, we have jazz. Now, jazz is it has its roots in Southern African American culture. And despite these roots, a band of white musicians claim to be the first jazz band. Now, this is probably because within the segregation of music, African Americans couldn't really make a name for themselves during this time. So instead, white musicians took the credit, wrongfully took the credit. This movement became typical of the music associated within the Roaring Twenties. And within these artists, many African Americans were barred from performing due to the clubs only allowing white patrons. One example is Mary Anderson, who was not allowed to perform at Howard University. Now, as you guys probably know from last week, Howard University is a historically Black university, and the conflict arose that the hall that she was scheduled to perform in was controlled by the Daughters of the Revolution, which did not allow her to perform because of her race. Now, even though these times of segregation, many African American musicians still played to audiences of African Americans. Now, as you guys can see, we have Marian Anderson in the top picture, and then Louis Armstrong, who is a famous jazz musician, in the bottom picture, especially from the 1920s to 1960s. He heavily influenced and defined the jazz movement. So moving on a little bit, we have R&B, which stands for rhythm and blues. Now, the first major band which pretty much defined the rhythm and blues movement was the Dixie Cups. And this featured Rosalie Hawkins, Barbara Ann Hawkins, Athelga Neville, and they basically brought the rhythm and blues movement to the foreground. Now, during this time period, racial segregation was at a high, and many found solace in the blues style of music. And this style really originated with W.C. Handy, often called the father of blues, and he's pictured on the left. And it basically encompassed singing away stars and moving away from them to bigger and better things. Now, the rhythm portion was largely developed surrounding World War II, when African Americans moved away from the South towards different urban centers, such as in the West and Northeast. Now, during this time, they pretty much faced segregation, so they wanted to develop a new style of music after they escaped the South. Now, rhythm and blues has a mix of many different elements, including blues, gospel, swing, and many harmonic structures, and is still evolving today. And next up, we have rock and roll. So when you guys picture a rock and roll artist, you might not picture a person of color. And that's largely because they face segregation in this genre as well. Now, rock and roll started from artists like Chuck Berry, Little Richard, Big Toe Turner, and they all transformed America with this new form of expression. But they were still marginalized even after creating this new music, largely because Elvis Presley played a rock and roll song on the Ed Sullivan Show. Now, the genre has its roots in rhythm and blues and influences from Deep South African Americans, and basically evolved from the rhythm and blues movement. Now, one of the prominent influences on the rock and roll movement comes from Rosetta Tharpe. And Tharpe was a self-taught guitarist who had her roots in gospel, and she basically transitioned to the classic rock and roll sound of society today. After learning guitar, she transformed the way she played gospel and basically defined the rock and roll movement. Now, although these origins are largely from African Americans, they were gradually cut out of their own music genre as it gained popularity. For instance, Elvis Presley, he's often called the king of rock and roll, and he owed a lot to African American artists during this time because he played multiracial songs, oftentimes to a multiracial audience, but he did take a lot of the credit for the founding of rock and roll. And finally, we have hip hop. Now, hip hop, there are four main characteristics of hip hop, and these include turntables, rapping, breakdancing, and graffiti art. And this all helped develop the hip hop movement. Now, during the time of political discourse, a changing economy, and industrial decline, many African American youth in the Bronx area in New York City sought new forms of expression. Now, this is because after many white individuals moved around New York City, particularly to suburban areas, it caused shifting demographics, and many communities became largely segregated, causing this economic decline. Now, as the movement gained popularity, though, the different characteristics evolved into new cultures of their own. Now, starting in the Bronx, they basically formed their new type of expression with what they had. Turntables, and then block parties started rapping, breakdancing, graffiti art, and basically the environment that they were in really started this hip hop movement. Now, as part of the rap and breakdancing styles, many DJs used samples from other artists, and this led to modern musical copyright laws. Now, for those of you that don't know, samples are basically a few seconds to decent clips of music from other songs and artists, while lyrics are often sung by the rapper over those samples. Now, due to the growing popularity of hip hop, many of the other artists noticed that their music was being used and wanted basically a share of the profits, which led to government intervention and stricter copyright laws, displacing the use of samples. But this did help the hip hop movement because many of the record producers then had to formulate their own type of music and pretty much pioneer a new path for hip hop. Now, on the right here, we see that DJ Kool Herc. Now, he was one of the very early pioneers in the hip hop movement, and he basically defined the DJ turntable characteristic. Now, he hosted a lot of block parties in New York in his Bronx area, the first being in his apartment. And moving on, we have one final thing of which genre of music is your guys' favorite? And did you know the history behind that genre? Like, say for instance, did you know the history behind rock and roll? I see Raymond like blues. That's nice. For me personally, I don't really have a favorite genre of music. I pretty much listen to a lot, but I did not really know that a lot of these genres were really crafted by African American artists, and they basically lost their rights to it over time after they were generally marginalized in these sections.
Yeah, I
And then we
agree.
see,
It surprised me with rock and roll. I never knew about how Black people actually originated it, and it was kind of, again, stolen, kind of, by the white industry to kind of popularize it as, yeah.
definitely. And then we see Landon enjoys pretty much everything as well. But yeah, this history is really surprising. Like, we're often not taught about this stuff, and it's really interesting to learn as well. Okay, thank you, everybody. And moving right along.
All right, so now we're moving on to Black athletes. Black leagues. African Americans began to play baseball in the late 1800s on military teams, college teams, and company teams. In 1945, Major League Baseball's Brooklyn Dodgers recruited Jackie Robinson from the Kansas City Monarchs. He became the first African American in the modern era to not only play on a major league roster, but paved the pathway for Black individuals to play on professional teams with white players. The leagues maintained a high level of professional skill and became centerpieces for economic development in many Black communities.
Jesse Owens, the first African American to win at the Olympics. So Jesse Owens was a four-time gold medalist in the track and field in the 1936 Olympics. He broke or tied 9 Olympic records and set 3 world records. When he returned to the United States, he received little recognition and accolades. Due to Owen's training as an athlete, his grades suffered, and he never graduated college and later declared bankruptcy. And a quote by him was, "After I came home from the 1936 Olympics with my 4 gold medals, it became increasingly apparent that everyone was going to slap me on the back, want to shake my hand, or have me up to their suite, but no one was going to offer me a job."
Althea Gibson. Growing up, Gibson was never an easy child to manage and would often skip school. Sports, however, was her salvation. When she was young, she faced tremendous prejudice, such as being banned from the US national championships simply because of the color of her skin. In 1956, she became the first Black woman to win a Grand Slam, which is known as the French Championships, now referred to as the French Open, and 8 years later, became the first Black woman to join the Ladies Professional Golf Association. Upon her victory, she reached out to various tennis support organizations, and not a single one of them replied. Throughout her lifetime as a tennis athlete, she had won 56 national and international singles and double titles. Next slide. Nathaniel Clifton. LeBron James, Kobe Bryant, Michael Jordan, and countless other basketball stars owe their careers, at least in part, to Nathaniel Sweetwater Clifton, the first Black man to sign an NBA contract. Clifton also received an annual salary of $10,000, said to be the highest salary paid to a Black basketball player up to that time. It was in the summer of 1950 when the Boston Celtics had drafted Chuck Cooper and officially broken the NBA's color line. Fun fact, in 1957, Clifton became the oldest man, at the age of 34, to be named an NBA All-Star. Next slide. So what have you guys learned, not just from athletics, but throughout the entire presentation, and what shocked you? Personally, I've learned that Black individuals of the past were lesser known, and they still made a significant impact to those that are well known today. And a majority of them broke the color barriers and paved the path for other Black communities and people to strive and achieve their goals, despite the segregation that was happening at the time.
I learned about how African Americans have had such an impact on music, and it's remarkable. And I think it's crazy how white people have taken a lot of their music as their own, when the reality is it was their music and it was stolen.
So I'm going to read some things in the chat that are popping up. Landon mentioned that nearly everything in this presentation is new to me. I think the lack of notoriety of African Americans in music and film speaks is a big notion that African American history is too often neglected. Yeah, I agree. And Clarity mentioned everyone can learn music. It doesn't matter by what color you are. That's true. If that's all, I think, Adrian, you can take it away for the last slide.
Yeah. Thank you guys so much for coming. We will have a meeting in the last Friday of February after break about the civil rights movement, and we'll probably cover into more recent civil rights movements like Black Lives Matter. So make sure to attend that and share more about your experience and continue to learn and improve. Thank you guys.